The forge fire roared like a living beast in the darkness, casting dancing shadows across Tessa Johnson's soot-streaked face as she hammered molten steel with precise, powerful strikes that echoed through the night-silent streets of Gunnison, Colorado. It was September of 1882, and the mountain town had made its position clear. A woman had no business working iron, no matter how skilled her hands or strong her will. Tessa wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her leather glove, leaving another dark smudge across her skin. The horseshoe she was crafting glowed orange-red in the dimness, its shape nearly perfect. Her father had taught her this trade before consumption took him 2 years ago, and she had sworn over his grave that she would keep the forge alive. But Gunnison had other ideas about what a 22-year-old woman should be doing with her life. The townsfolk crossed the street when they saw her coming. The women whispered behind their fans and gloved hands, scandalized by her leather apron and the way she wore men's work pants beneath her skirts. The men were worse, their rejection sharp and deliberate. They took their business to Horace Miller's smithy on the far side of town, even though his work was inferior and his prices higher. Miller himself had made it known he would buy her property for a pittance whenever she came to her senses and admitted defeat. But Tessa Johnson had never been good at admitting defeat. She plunged the horseshoe into the water barrel and steam hissed up in a violent cloud. The metal cooled to black, and she held it up to examine in the firelight. Perfect. Not that anyone would care. Her last customer had been 3 weeks ago, a desperate farmer whose mule had thrown a shoe on the road into town. He had paid her quickly and left faster, as though association with her might taint his reputation. The money box beneath the floorboards was nearly empty. Another month, maybe 2 if she was careful, and she would have to close the forge. The thought made her chest tighten with a grief that rivaled what she had felt standing over her father's coffin. This forge was all she had left of him, of the life they had built together after her mother died giving birth to a stillborn son when Tessa was only 7. She was setting the horseshoe aside with the others she had made for an inventory that no one wanted when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Multiple horses, moving at an easy walk. Tessa straightened, suddenly aware of how isolated her forge was at the edge of town, how dark the September night had grown. She reached for the hammer, its weight familiar and comforting in her grip. 3 horses materialized from the darkness, and atop them sat 3 riders. Even in the dim light from the forge, Tessa could make out the dust on their clothes, the weathered look of men who spent more time under open sky than under any roof. Cowboys, then, probably passing through on their way to one of the bigger ranches in the valley. The man in front dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had been born in a saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar beneath his worn hat. As he stepped into the light of the forge, Tessa could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and eyes that caught the firelight like polished stone. "Evening," he said, his voice low and polite. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that Tessa had not received from any man in Gunnison for longer than she could remember. "Name is Lucas Vaughn. These are my brothers, James and Robert. We are looking for a blacksmith." Tessa lifted her chin, ready for the inevitable moment when he would realize she was the blacksmith and make some excuse to leave. "You found one." Lucas Vaughn looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dancing shadows. Then he glanced back at the forge, at the neat row of tools hanging on the wall, at the horseshoes she had just finished. When his gaze returned to her face, something in his eyes had shifted. "Good. I need someone who can shoe 3 horses. We have been on the trail for 2 weeks and they are overdue." Tessa felt her heart skip a beat. "You want me to shoe your horses?" "That is why I am standing in front of a forge talking to a blacksmith," Lucas said, and there was no mockery in his tone, no condescension. He stated it as simple fact, as though there was nothing unusual about a woman working iron in the middle of the night. One of his brothers, the younger-looking one with sandy hair, shifted in his saddle. "Luke, are you sure?" "I am sure," Lucas said without looking back. His eyes remained fixed on Tessa's face. "Can you do it tonight? We need to be on the road at first light." "I can do it now," Tessa said, setting down her hammer and straightening her shoulders. "Bring them into the light so I can see their hooves." For the next 2 hours, Tessa worked with steady concentration, aware of Lucas Vaughn watching her every move. She had expected skepticism, the usual masculine doubt about her abilities. Instead, he observed with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about her process, commenting on the quality of her work. His brothers eventually dismounted and sat on the bench outside the forge, but Lucas remained standing, holding each horse's head while she worked, murmuring soothing words to keep them calm. "You have a good hand with them," Tessa said as she fitted the second shoe to his horse, a beautiful sorrel mare with a white blaze down her face. "Not all men do." "Horses and I have an understanding," Lucas said. "I treat them with respect, and they do not throw me into the nearest cactus patch." "It has worked well so far." Tessa felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward, something that might have been a smile if she remembered how to make one. "Wise policy." "I learned it from my father," Lucas said. "He ran a ranch down in New Mexico territory before he died. Taught me that any creature worth riding is worth treating well." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Lucas was quiet for a moment, stroking the mare's neck. "Died 3 years ago. Took a bullet that was meant for a Navajo family some drifters were harassing. He always did have a habit of standing between bullies and whoever they had decided to pick on." Tessa drove the nail home with 3 precise strikes. "You miss him." "Every day." Lucas glanced at her, and in the firelight his eyes were warm. "You lose someone too. I can hear it in your voice." "My father," Tessa admitted, surprised at her own willingness to share this with a stranger. 2 years ago, he taught me everything about this forge. Then he taught you well. This is fine work, some of the best I have seen." The compliment settled into Tessa's chest like a warm coal, heating something that had gone cold during the long months of rejection and isolation. She finished the mare's shoes and moved on to the next horse, a rangy bay gelding that belonged to the brother named James. Lucas continued to help without being asked, anticipating what she needed, handing her tools before she reached for them. When all 3 horses were shod and Tessa was wiping down her tools, Lucas pulled out a leather pouch and counted out coins into her palm. She looked down at the money and felt her breath catch. It was more than fair, it was generous. "This is too much," she said. "It is exactly right for the quality of work you did," Lucas said firmly, "and for doing it in the middle of the night without complaint." Tessa closed her fingers around the coins, feeling the weight of them, the promise they represented. "Thank you. We will be back," Lucas said, and something in the way he said it made Tessa look up sharply. He was watching her with an intensity that made her aware of the soot on her face, the way her hair had escaped its braid in sweaty tendrils. "We have land about 15 miles north of here. Plan to build up a horse ranch, raise and train quality animals. I will need a good blacksmith, someone I can rely on, someone who knows what they are doing." "The town has a blacksmith," Tessa said carefully. "Horace Miller. His forge is on the main street." "I am sure he does acceptable work," Lucas said, "but I prefer excellent work. I will be back next month to have these horses shod again, and I will bring more business with me, if you are willing." Tessa stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or pity. She found neither. What she saw instead was respect, the same look her father used to have when he watched her work. "I am willing." "Good." Lucas swung up into his saddle with fluid ease, gathering the reins. His brothers were already mounted, looking tired and ready for sleep. "Take care of yourself, Miss Johnson. Gunnison does not know what it has." He tipped his hat to her one more time, and then the three Vaughn brothers rode off into the darkness, their horses' new shoes ringing clear on the hard, packed earth. Tessa stood in the doorway of her forge and watched until they disappeared, the coin still warm in her palm. That night, she slept better than she had in months. Lucas Vaughn kept his word. Exactly 4 weeks later, on a crisp October afternoon when the aspens had turned gold on the mountainsides, he rode back into Gunnison leading 2 additional horses. Tessa was working on a set of hinges for her forge door when she heard the familiar sound of his arrival. She looked up to find him dismounting, a smile crossing his face when he saw her. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I am here for those shoes." "Mr. Vaughn," Tessa replied, setting down her work, "your timing is good, I just banked the fire." Over the next hour, while Tessa worked on his 5 horses, Lucas told her about the ranch he and his brothers were building. They had purchased 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, and they were in the process of constructing a barn and corrals. The house was already livable, though Lucas admitted with some embarrassment that it was rough and would benefit from a woman's touch, something his brothers reminded him of daily. "They think I should find a wife," Lucas said, leaning against the forge wall with his arms crossed. "As though a woman can be purchased like lumber from the general store." "And what do you think?" Tessa asked, focusing on the hoof in her lap. "I think a wife should be a partner, not a purchase. Someone who shares your vision, who wants to build something with you rather than for you." He paused. "My mother was that way with my father. They built everything together. I will not settle for less." Tessa felt something flutter in her chest but pushed it down firmly. Lucas Vaughn was a customer, nothing more. Even if he treated her with respect, even if his smile made her forget about the forge's heat, she could not afford to imagine anything beyond the professional relationship they had established. She had been hurt too many times by this town's rejection to open herself to more disappointment. But Lucas kept coming back. Every month, like clockwork, he would arrive with horses to be shod. Sometimes it was 3, sometimes 7. He always paid fairly and stayed to talk while she worked, telling her stories about the ranch, about the horses they were training, about his brother's antics. Slowly, carefully, Tessa began to let her guard down. She found herself smiling more, laughing at his stories, sharing her own memories of growing up in the forge with her father. The town noticed, of course. Gunnison noticed everything. It was a gray November morning when Martha Henderson and 2 other women from the church came to Tessa's forge. They found her working on a set of iron brackets, her face flushed from the heat. Martha was the banker's wife, a woman who prided herself on being the moral compass of Gunnison's female population. "Tessa Johnson," Martha said, her voice sharp as a blade, "we need to speak with you about your behavior." Tessa set down her hammer slowly. "My behavior?" "The entire town has seen that cowboy coming here month after month. A single man visiting a single woman with no chaperone, late into the evening. Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It looks like a customer conducting business with a blacksmith," Tessa said, keeping her voice level despite the anger beginning to simmer in her gut. "It looks like something far more scandalous than that," one of the other women said, her face pinched with disapproval. "You are already enough of an embarrassment to this town, working in a man's trade, wearing men's clothing. Now you are entertaining men alone in the dark. It is disgraceful." Lucas Vaughn is a customer, Tessa said, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He brings me business. He pays me for my work. That is all. That is all now, perhaps, Martha said. But everyone knows what happens when a woman allows a man such liberties. You are ruining your reputation, what little you have left, and you are giving Gunnison a bad name in the process. What will people think of our town if they hear we allow such behavior? What will people think of your town when they hear you ran off the only blacksmith willing to work at night and do quality work? Tessa shot back. Lucas Vaughn does not come to me because of scandal. He comes because my work is better than Horace Miller's, and you all know it. Martha's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me that way? You are nothing but a stubborn girl playing at a man's job. If you had any decency, you would sell this forge and find proper work. Or better yet, find a husband who can support you as a woman should be supported. Get out, Tessa said quietly. What? Get out of my forge. Now, before I forget that I am a lady and say something truly unforgivable. The three women left in a rustle of skirts and offended huffs, but Tessa knew the damage was done. By nightfall, the entire town would be talking about her impropriety. The few customers who still occasionally brought her business would disappear entirely. She would be even more isolated than before. She was still standing there, staring at nothing, when Lucas arrived an hour later. He took one look at her face and immediately asked what was wrong. Tessa told him everything, the words spilling out in an angry, hurt torrent. Lucas listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with each sentence. So that is it then, Tessa finished. Whatever business I had left will be gone now. The town has finally found a way to drive me out. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me." Tessa's head snapped up. "What? Marry me?" Lucas repeated, and now he was moving closer, his eyes intense on her face. "If the problem is that I am a single man visiting a single woman, then we will solve that problem. Marry me, Tessa." "That is insane," Tessa whispered. "You cannot propose marriage just to solve a scandal." "I am not proposing just to solve a scandal," Lucas said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. They were rough and warm, calloused from work just like hers. "I am proposing because I have been coming to this forge every month for 3 months now, and every time I leave, I find it harder to stay away. I am proposing because you are the strongest, most skilled, most stubborn woman I have ever met, and I want to spend my life with someone who knows how to fight for what they believe in. I am proposing because when I picture my future, I see you in it." Tessa's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Lucas, we barely know each other. I know you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you are concentrating on a difficult piece. I know you hum when you think no one is listening. I know you take your coffee black and strong enough to strip paint. I know you loved your father more than anything and that losing him nearly broke you. I know you are scared of being hurt again." His hands tightened on hers. "I know enough, Tessa. And I want to learn the rest over the next 50 years. The town will say I trapped you," Tessa said, but her voice was shaking now. "They will say I am a scheming woman who used scandal to catch a husband. Let them say whatever they want. I stopped caring about gossip when I buried my father. Life is too short to waste on people who have nothing better to do than tear others down." Lucas lifted one hand to her face, his thumb brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. "Say yes, Tessa, please." Tessa looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity, nothing but warmth and hope, and something that might have been love, or at least the beginning of it. She thought about the empty money box, about the lonely nights in the forge, about the way the town had turned its back on her. Then she thought about the way Lucas looked at her like she was something precious, the way he respected her work, the way he made her laugh. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Lucas's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He pulled her into his arms, and Tessa let herself be held for the first time in 2 years. He was solid and warm, and he smelled like leather and horses and the open range. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. "We will do this properly," he said. "I will speak to the minister tomorrow. We can be married by the end of the week, and then you will come to the ranch and you can set up your forge there. We have plenty of room, and God knows we will need a blacksmith with all the horses we plan to raise." "I cannot just abandon this forge," Tessa protested. "It was my father's. Then we will move your equipment, every tool, every piece of it. We will rebuild your forge at the ranch exactly the way you want it. Your father's legacy will continue, just in a new place." Lucas squeezed her hands. "You will never have to face this town's rejection again, Tessa. I promise you that." Tessa felt tears sting her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since her father's funeral. Lucas pulled her close again, and she buried her face in his chest and let them fall. They were married 5 days later in the small church on Main Street. Lucas's brothers stood up with him, looking pleased and a little smug, as though they had known this was coming all along. Tessa wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and carried a bouquet of the last autumn wildflowers James and Robert had picked from the meadows around the ranch. The town turned out in force, but not out of support. They came to witness the scandal, to see the woman Blacksmith marry the cowboy who had defended her. Martha Henderson sat in the front pew with a face like she was attending a funeral instead of a wedding. Horace Miller glowered from the back, clearly bitter about losing even the small amount of business Tessa had been taking from him. Tessa did not care about any of them. She kept her eyes on Lucas, who stood at the altar in his best suit looking nervous and happy and impossibly handsome. When the minister asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, she said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear through the church. When Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, Tessa felt something settle into place in her chest, as though she had found a piece of herself she had not known was missing. Lucas kissed her with the whole town watching, a sweet, chaste press of lips that still managed to make Tessa's toes curl in her boots. Then they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, and climbed into the wagon Lucas had brought to transport Tessa's belongings to the ranch. They spent the next 2 days carefully dismantling the forge. Lucas worked tirelessly, treating each tool with reverence, understanding that these were not just implements but memories of Tessa's father. They loaded everything into wagons, from the anvil to the smallest hammer, from the forge itself to the barrel she used for quenching. The building would be sold eventually, but the heart of it, the soul of it, would live on. The ranch took Tessa's breath away when she first saw it. The house was simple but well built, a sturdy structure of logs and stone with a wide porch that looked out over the valley. The barn was larger than she had expected, with room for dozens of horses. Corrals spread out in neat lines, and beyond them, the land rolled away in gentle waves of grass and sage, backed by the dramatic rise of the Rocky Mountains. "It is beautiful," Tessa said, and Lucas smiled with pride. "It is home," he said. "Our home now." James and Robert had clearly been busy in the days leading up to the wedding. They had prepared a space near the barn for Tessa's forge, a sturdy roof and 3 walls that would protect her from the worst of the weather while still providing the ventilation she needed. They spent the next week setting up the forge exactly as Tessa wanted it, and by the time they were finished, it was even better than what she had left behind in Gunnison. The first time Tessa fired up the forge on the ranch, Lucas came to watch. She was making horseshoes, stocking up for the work she knew was coming. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that same look of respect and admiration on his face that she had come to cherish. "You are beautiful when you work," he said. "Did you know that?" Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. "I am covered in soot and sweat. You are strong and skilled and completely focused. It is captivating." Lucas pushed off from the doorway and came closer. "I know this marriage happened quickly, Tessa. I know we are still learning each other, but I want you to know that I meant every word I said. I am not going to wake up and regret this. I am going to wake up grateful that you said yes." Tessa set down her hammer and turned to face him fully. In the firelight, Lucas looked younger, more vulnerable. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I am grateful too. You saved me, Lucas, not just from the town, but from giving up. I had been about ready to surrender to let them win. You reminded me that I am worth fighting for." Lucas caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You have always been worth fighting for. The town was too blind to see it." That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Lucas made love to Tessa with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He touched her like she was something precious, something to be cherished. And afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Tessa felt safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. Winter came to the Colorado mountains with swift brutality. Snow fell in thick blankets, transforming the ranch into a world of white silence. Tessa worked in her forge, grateful for its warmth, crafting shoes for the horses and various iron implements the ranch needed. Lucas and his brothers worked from dawn to dusk, caring for the horses, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay in the evenings. They would gather in the main house, and Tessa learned what it meant to be part of a family again. James, who was 23, had a quick wit and a talent for storytelling. Robert, the youngest at 21, was quieter but had a gift for understanding horses that rivaled Lucas's. They teased each other mercilessly but always with affection, and they welcomed Tessa into their circle without reservation. "Luke was insufferable before you came along," James informed her one night over dinner. "Moping around, talking about responsibility and duty. Now he actually smiles. It is unnerving." "I do not mope," Lucas protested, but he was grinning. "You absolutely moped," Robert said. "Remember that time you sat on the porch for 2 hours staring at nothing because you were thinking about Miss Johnson and whether it was too soon to call her Tessa?" Lucas threw a roll at his brother, and Tessa laughed so hard she nearly choked on her stew. This was what she had been missing, she realized. Not just love, but belonging. Not just acceptance, but joy. As winter deepened, Tessa's belly began to swell with new life. She and Lucas had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor from Gunnison came out to confirm it in January, the whole ranch erupted in celebration. James and Robert were beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of becoming uncles. Lucas, meanwhile, became almost comically protective, insisting Tessa rest more, work less, take better care of herself. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Tessa told him, exasperated but secretly touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies and working at the same time for thousands of years." "Not my wife," Lucas said stubbornly. "Not with my baby. You will take it easy, or I will carry you into the house and lock you in the bedroom." "You would not dare." Lucas raised an eyebrow, and Tessa recognized the look in his eyes. He absolutely would dare. She sighed and agreed to cut back on her forge work, at least during the coldest parts of the day. Lucas seemed satisfied with this compromise, though he still watched her like a hawk whenever she was near the fire. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared in the meadows, 3 men rode onto the ranch property. Tessa was in the forge, working on a set of hinges for the new stable door, when she heard Lucas calling her name. Something in his tone made her set down her tools and hurry outside. The three men were still mounted, facing Lucas and his brothers in a tense tableau. They were rough-looking, with the hard eyes and casual violence of men who lived outside the law. The leader, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, was speaking. "We are just looking for a place to rest for the night, maybe get some food. We can pay." "We do not take in drifters," Lucas said, his voice firm but not hostile. "There is a boarding house in Gunnison about 15 miles south. You can make it before dark if you leave now." The scarred man's eyes found Tessa, and something unpleasant crossed his face. "That your woman? Pretty thing. You do not see many women out in these parts who look that good." Tessa felt Lucas tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm, a silent plea for calm. "We have told you we cannot help you, gentlemen. Please move along." "Gentlemen," one of the other men repeated with a nasty laugh. "Hear that, boys? She thinks we are gentlemen." "I think you are men who are about to leave my property," Lucas said, and now there was steel in his voice. His hand had moved to rest on the gun at his hip, not drawing but making his position clear. James and Robert had spread out slightly, flanking their brother. "Do not make me ask again." For a long, tense moment, the scarred man stared at Lucas. Then he spat into the dirt and yanked his horse's head around. "Come on, let us get out of this place." Probably all the women are as cold as that one anyway. They rode off, but Tessa felt unsettled for the rest of the day. Lucas insisted she stay in the house, and for once she did not argue. That night, he and his brothers took turns keeping watch, though the drifters did not return. "Do you think they will come back?" Tessa asked Lucas when he finally came to bed in the early hours of the morning. "No," Lucas said, pulling her close. His hand rested protectively over her rounded belly. "They were testing us, seeing if we were easy marks. We made it clear we are not. They will move on to easier prey." "I do not like that there are men like that in the world," Tessa whispered. "Men who see women as things to take." "Neither do I. But that is why we build places like this, homes where we can be safe. That is why I will teach our son or daughter to be strong and to stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves." Lucas kissed her forehead. "My father died protecting people from men like that. I would do the same in a heartbeat." "Please do not die," Tessa said, sudden fear gripping her heart. "I only just found you. I cannot lose you too." "You will not lose me," Lucas promised. "I am too stubborn to die. You said so yourself." Tessa laughed shakily and burrowed into his warmth, trying to believe him. Spring brought new life to the ranch in every form. Tessa's belly grew round and heavy, and several of the mares gave birth to long-legged, wobbly foals that delighted everyone. The ranch was beginning to earn a reputation for quality horses, and buyers came from as far away as Denver to see what the Vaughn brothers had available. In late May, on a warm afternoon when the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers, Tessa went into labor. Lucas nearly came apart at the seams, pacing the porch while the midwife they had hired worked with Tessa in the bedroom. James and Robert tried to calm him down, but Lucas was beyond reason, convinced that something terrible was about to happen. It took 12 hours, but as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife finally let Lucas into the room, he found Tessa exhausted but radiant, holding their son wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet Thomas," Tessa said softly. "Thomas Henry Vaughn." Lucas sank to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. He reached out with one shaking hand to touch the baby's impossibly small fingers. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." "Believe it," Tessa said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "He has your nose." "Poor kid," Lucas said, but he was grinning through his tears. He leaned in to kiss Tessa's forehead, then her lips. Thank you for him, for this, for everything. Thomas proved to be a good baby, though he had his father's stubbornness and his mother's lung capacity. Lucas was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the floor with his son, changing diapers without complaint, staring at Thomas for hours as though he could not quite believe this tiny person existed. Tessa healed and returned to her forge work gradually, though she now had to balance it with caring for Thomas. She would set up a cradle near the forge, where the baby would sleep or gurgle happily while she worked. Lucas checked on them constantly, always finding excuses to come by, and Tessa suspected he just wanted to see his family. In July, a rider came from Gunnison with unexpected news. Horace Miller had suffered a stroke and could no longer work his forge. The town council was asking if Tessa would consider coming back, perhaps a few days a week, to handle the overflow of work. Absolutely not, Lucas said immediately when Tessa told him. That town treated you like dirt. They do not deserve your skills now. But Tessa was conflicted. It is not about what they deserve. It is about the people who need a blacksmith. The farmers, the teamsters, the people who are just trying to make a living. They should not suffer because the town council and people like Martha Henderson are fools. You have a 3-month-old baby, Lucas pointed out. You cannot haul him back and forth to Gunnison several times a week. I know, Tessa said, but maybe I could go once a week on Saturdays. You would be here with Thomas. It would only be for a day. Lucas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, if that is what you want to do, I will support you. But the moment anyone in that town says one disrespectful word to you, the moment anyone makes you feel less than the skilled craftswoman you are, you come home. Deal, Tessa agreed. So every Saturday, Tessa would ride into Gunnison and spend the day working in her old forge, which the town council had purchased from her, and now offered to let her use. It was strange being back in the building where she had spent so many lonely nights, but it was also satisfying to see how many people needed her work. The town treated her differently now. She was a married woman, a mother, and somehow that made her acceptable in a way she had never been as a single female blacksmith. Tessa found this both amusing and infuriating, but she kept her thoughts to herself and focused on her work. Martha Henderson came by one Saturday in August, ostensibly to have a broken latch repaired. But as Tessa worked, Martha hovered, clearly wanting to say something. I owe you an apology, Martha finally said, the words seeming to cost her. The things I said to you last year were unkind and unfair. You have proven yourself to be a respectable woman and a skilled tradeswoman. I was wrong to judge you so harshly. Tessa looked up from the latch, surprised. Martha's face was red, and she would not quite meet Tessa's eyes. This apology was clearly difficult for her, which made it feel more genuine. Thank you, Tessa said quietly. I appreciate that. Your husband is a good man, Martha continued. The way he stood by you, married you despite the scandal we were all creating, that takes character. Lucas is the best man I know, Tessa agreed. But he did not marry me despite anything. He married me because he wanted to, because he saw me for who I am. Martha nodded slowly. I think perhaps that is a lesson some of us needed to learn, that a woman can be more than one thing. That she can be a wife and a mother and also skilled at a trade. It was not a perfect apology, and it did not erase the pain of the previous year, but it was something. Tessa accepted it with grace and finished repairing the latch. The years that followed were good ones. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around the ranch and watching his mother work in the forge. When he was 3, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Louise, who had Lucas's dark hair and Tessa's stubborn chin. The ranch flourished. The Vaughn brothers became known throughout Colorado for their quality horses and fair dealing. Tessa's forge work supported the ranch and brought in additional income from clients throughout the valley. James eventually married a schoolteacher from a nearby town, and Robert courted the daughter of a neighboring rancher. On a warm September evening in 1890, 8 years after they had first met, Tessa and Lucas sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Thomas and Sarah were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, James's wife Emma was preparing dinner, and Robert was expected any moment with his fiancée Catherine. "You remember that first night I came to your forge?" Lucas asked, taking Tessa's hand in his. "Of course I do. You asked me to shoe your horses, and I thought you were going to change your mind and leave as soon as you realized I was the blacksmith." "I knew you were the blacksmith before I dismounted," Lucas admitted. "I had heard about you in town, the woman who refused to give up her father's forge despite the whole town turning against her. I wanted to meet you, to see if you were as stubborn and strong as everyone said." Tessa turned to look at him, surprised. "You knew? Then why did you act like it was no surprise?" "Because I did not want you to think I was there out of pity or curiosity. I wanted you to know I respected your work, not your story." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips. "Best decision I ever made, riding to that forge. It gave me everything. A wife, a family, a home worth building. You gave me my life back," Tessa said softly. "I was drowning in that town and you threw me a rope. You told me I was worth fighting for when I had forgotten how to fight for myself." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected. "That is what partners do." Thomas came running up to the porch then, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." He held up a horseshoe, old and rusted. "Is this from Mama's forge?" Tessa took the horseshoe and turned it over, examining the mark on it. "This is one I made years ago, before you were born." "Where did you find it?" "By the old barn foundation. There are a bunch of them out there." Lucas and Tessa exchanged a look. Those were probably from the shoes she had made during those lonely months in Gunnison, the ones she had crafted for an inventory no one wanted. Somehow they had made their way here, to the ranch, as though even then, fate was pulling her toward this place, this life. "Tell you what, Thomas," Tessa said, handing the horseshoe back to her son. "You keep that. It is a piece of history from before your papa and I met. Someday you can tell your children about how their grandmother was the only female blacksmith in Gunnison, and how their grandfather was the only man brave enough to ask her to shoe his horses." "And then you fell in love," Thomas said, rolling his eyes with the exasperation of a 7-year-old who found romance ridiculous but also secretly fascinating. "And then we fell in love," Lucas confirmed, pulling Tessa close. "The best love story I know." Sarah toddled up the porch steps then, demanding to be picked up. Tessa scooped her daughter into her lap and Lucas wrapped his arms around both of them. Thomas leaned against his father's side, still clutching his found treasure. Inside the house, Emma called that dinner was ready. Robert arrived with Catherine, and soon the house was full of noise and laughter and the warm chaos of family. They gathered around the table, passing plates and sharing stories from their day, and Tessa looked around at all the faces she loved and felt her heart swell almost painfully with gratitude. After dinner, when the children were in bed and the guests had gone home, Tessa returned to her forge. It was her habit to end each day by banking the fire properly, making sure everything was secure for the night. Lucas followed her, as he often did, content to simply be in her presence. "You know what I love most about this life," Tessa said, hanging up her hammer in its proper place. "It is not just that we built something together, though that is wonderful. It is that every single day I get to be exactly who I am. I do not have to hide or apologize or shrink myself to fit someone else's idea of what I should be. You gave me that gift, Lucas, the freedom to be myself." Lucas came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You had that gift all along, Tessa. You just needed someone to see it, to honor it. I am glad I got to be that someone." They stood there in the cooling forge, surrounded by the tools of Tessa's trade and the evidence of their shared work. And Tessa thought about how far she had come from that bitter, lonely woman, hammering horseshoes in the dark. She thought about rejection and redemption, about the courage it took to stay true to yourself when the whole world was telling you to change. Most of all, she thought about love. Not the fairy tale kind that solved all problems with a wave of a magic wand, but the real, gritty, everyday kind. The love that showed up every month to get horses shod. The love that said, "Marry me," when scandal threatened. The love that built a forge in a new place so she could continue her father's legacy. The love that held her while she labored to bring new life into the world. The love that supported her dreams even when they were unconventional. "Thank you for saying you would shoe my horses every month," Tessa said, turning in Lucas's arms to face him. "That might seem like a strange thing to thank you for, but that simple promise changed my entire life." Lucas smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made Tessa's heart skip a beat. "I did not just promise to shoe my horses every month, Tessa. I promised to come back, to keep showing up, to prove to you that not everyone in this world would reject you. And I would make that promise 1,000 times over because it led me to you." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Tessa kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Come on, wife of mine. Let us go home." They walked hand in hand from the forge to the house, where lamplight glowed warm in the windows. Behind them, the mountains stood dark against a sky full of stars. The September night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Tessa thought about the girl she had been, standing alone in her forge in Gunnison, believing she would face the world's rejection forever. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to surrendering to the town's cruel judgment. And she thought about the miracle of Lucas Vaughn riding into her life and saying those simple words, "I need someone who can shoe 3 horses." Such a small thing, really, such an ordinary request, but it had been the beginning of everything. Years continued to pass with the steady, comforting rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew tall and strong, learning the horse trade from his father and uncles, though he also showed an interest in forge work that made Tessa's heart swell with pride. Sarah became an excellent rider, fearless and skilled, with a talent for gentling even the most difficult horses. In 1895, when Thomas was 12 and Sarah was 9, Tessa gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Grace. Lucas joked that they were building their own town, but Tessa could see the profound happiness in his eyes every time he looked at their children. This was what he had always wanted, she realized, not just a ranch or a business, but a family, a legacy of love and work and values worth passing down. The Vaughn Ranch became known far beyond Colorado. People came from all over to purchase their horses and to see the legendary female blacksmith who crafted the finest shoes in the territory. Tessa trained other blacksmiths, including several young women who had heard her story and wanted to learn the trade themselves. She became something she had never imagined being: a mentor, a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let the world tell you what you could not do. Gunnison changed too. Slowly, reluctantly at first, and then with gathering momentum, the town began to see women differently. A woman opened a law office in 1897. Another started a newspaper. When the town council tried to object, the mayor, who was new and more progressive than his predecessor, pointed to Tessa Vaughn and asked what possible argument they could make after she had proven so spectacularly that women were capable of anything men could do. Martha Henderson came to visit the ranch one autumn day, older now and softer around the edges. She brought fresh bread and asked Tessa's forgiveness for the years of cruelty and judgment. "I was afraid," Martha admitted as they sat on the porch with tea. "Afraid of what it meant that you could do things I could never imagine doing. Afraid that if women like you could exist, then maybe I had wasted my life being small and confined when I could have been something more. It was easier to try to cut you down than to examine my own choices." "I forgive you," Tessa said, and meant it. The anger she had carried for so long had transmuted into something gentler, something that looked like understanding. "We are all doing our best with what we know at the time. You know better now. That matters." Martha nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "You have built something remarkable here, Tessa. Not just the ranch or the forge, but the family. The life. You proved all of us wrong, and you did it with grace. That takes a stronger woman than I will ever be." "Strength comes in many forms," Tessa said gently. "You were strong enough to admit you were wrong and to apologize. That is no small thing." After Martha left, Lucas found Tessa standing in the yard, staring out at the mountains. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, a gesture that had become as familiar and necessary as breathing over the years. "You are thinking deep thoughts," he observed. "I am thinking about forgiveness," Tessa said. "About how holding on to anger is like keeping the forge fire burning all night. It takes so much fuel, so much energy, and for what? The work is already done. Better to let it cool and start fresh in the morning." "You are wiser than I am," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am still angry at how they treated you, even after all these years." "That is because you love me," Tessa said, turning to face him. "And I love you for it. But I am tired of letting that old pain take up space in my heart. I would rather fill that space with gratitude for everything I have now. For you, for our children, for this life we built together." Lucas studied her face, his eyes full of the same deep affection she had seen there every day for the past 13 years. "Have I told you today that you are extraordinary?" "Not yet," Tessa said with a smile. "But the day is not over." "You are extraordinary," Lucas said seriously. "You are the strongest, most forgiving, most talented woman I have ever known, and I fall in love with you more deeply every single day." Tessa kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Thomas appeared around the corner of the house, leading a young mare. "Papa, can you help me? She is skittish about having her hooves handled." "Of course," Lucas said. Then to Tessa, "Duty calls, but we are not finished with this conversation. I plan to tell you how extraordinary you are at least 5 more times before bed." Tessa laughed and watched him go, her heart full. She returned to her forge where a project was waiting, a set of decorative iron gates commissioned by a wealthy rancher in Denver. As she worked, heating and shaping the metal with practiced precision, she thought about how this simple act of creation had been the thing that saved her. The rhythm of hammer on anvil, the glow of hot metal, the satisfaction of shaping raw iron into something useful and beautiful. These were the things that had kept her going during the darkest days. And they were still what centered her now, what reminded her of who she was beneath all the other roles she played. Sarah came into the forge, now 9 years old and already showing signs of the beauty she would become. "Mama, can you teach me to make a horseshoe?" Tessa felt her breath catch. This was the question she had been hoping for, waiting for, since Sarah was born. "You want to learn forge work?" "I want to learn everything," Sarah said with the confidence of a child who had never been told she could not do something. I want to ride like Papa, and I want to forge iron like you. I want to do everything." "Then we will teach you everything," Tessa promised, pulling her daughter close. "Every skill, every secret, everything we know, and you will take it and make it your own, and you will build a life that is exactly what you want it to be." As Sarah began her first clumsy attempts at hammering metal under Tessa's careful guidance, Tessa felt the circle completing itself. Her father had taught her. She was teaching her daughter, and someday, perhaps, Sarah would teach her own children. The legacy would continue, not because it had to, but because it was worth preserving, worth passing down. The years rolled on with their mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. James and Emma had 3 children. Robert and Catherine had 4. The ranch expanded, adding more land, more horses, more barns. Thomas grew into a fine young man and married the daughter of a horse trader from Wyoming. Sarah became the first woman in Colorado to earn recognition as a master blacksmith, surpassing even her mother's reputation. The twins, Daniel and Grace, chose different paths. Daniel became a veterinarian, studying in Denver and then returning to the ranch to care for the horses. Grace became a teacher, opening a school for girls that emphasized practical skills alongside traditional education. Through it all, Lucas and Tessa remained the center of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older together, their faces gaining lines, their hair turning silver, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house, spilling out onto the porch and into the yard. A long table had been set up outdoors, covered with food and flowers. Lanterns hung from the trees, ready to be lit when evening fell. As the party swirled around them, Lucas pulled Tessa aside, leading her away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The same view they had admired on that first evening after their wedding, though the land was more developed now, more shaped by human hands. 25 years, Lucas said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like 25 minutes, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I cannot imagine my life without you, Tessa said honestly. When I try to remember that woman I was before you came to my forge, she seems like a stranger. Someone I knew once but have grown away from. She was brave, Lucas said. Braver than anyone gave her credit for. She held on when it would have been so much easier to let go. If she had not been that brave, we would not be standing here now. Then I am grateful to her, Tessa said. To that lonely, stubborn girl who refused to surrender. She led me to you. Lucas turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I have something for you, an anniversary gift. Lucas, we agreed no gifts. Having everyone here is gift enough. This is not that kind of gift. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Open it. Tessa unfolded the paper carefully and found herself looking at a deed. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing. This is the old forge building in Gunnison, the one where we met. I bought it, Lucas said. The town was going to tear it down, build something else on that lot. I could not let that happen. That building is where our story began, where I first saw you working in the firelight and knew my life was about to change. It felt wrong to let it be destroyed. What will we do with it? Tessa asked, touched beyond words. Whatever you want. Turn it into a museum, a school for blacksmiths, or just leave it standing as a monument to the woman who refused to give up. It is yours, Tessa, to do with as you see fit. Tessa looked down at the deed, then up at her husband's beloved face. I think, she said slowly, I would like to turn it into a training center, a place where young women can learn trades like blacksmithing, carpentry, and leatherwork. Skills that will let them support themselves, build their own lives. We could call it the Johnson Training Center after my father. Your father would be so proud of you, Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. I wish he could have known what you became, what you built. He knew, Tessa said with certainty. He taught me everything I needed to know. He gave me the tools and you gave me the courage to keep using them. Between the two of you, you made me who I am. They returned to the party, where someone had started playing a fiddle. Lucas swept Tessa into a dance, twirling her around the yard while their children and grandchildren clapped and cheered. Tessa threw back her head and laughed, feeling younger than she had in years, feeling the pure joy of being alive and loved and surrounded by family. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, bathing everything in warm, golden light, Tessa looked around at all the faces she loved. She thought about the winding path that had brought her here, from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to love, from despair to joy. It had not been easy. There had been moments when she truly believed she would not survive the pain, but she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. And standing here now, with Lucas's arm around her waist and her family gathered close, Tessa understood that every moment of struggle had been worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every bitter moment of rejection had led her to this point, to this life, to this love. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured in her ear. "I am thinking," Tessa said, "about a young cowboy who once rode into Gunnison and asked me to shoe his horses. About how that simple request changed everything. About how love can find you in the unlikeliest places if you are brave enough to stay open to it." Lucas tightened his arm around her. "Best thing I ever did, asking you to shoe those horses. Best thing I ever did was saying yes," Tessa replied. They stood together as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had shone on their wedding night, on the night each of their children was born, on all the thousands of ordinary and extraordinary nights that had made up their life together. And Tessa knew, with the certainty that comes from a life well lived, that if she could go back and do it all again, she would not change a single thing. The rejection had hurt, but it had also refined her, burning away everything that was not essential and leaving behind pure strength. The loneliness had been agonizing, but it had taught her to value connection when it finally came. The struggle had been real, but it had made the victory so much sweeter. And Lucas, her Lucas, had been the one constant through all of it. The man who saw her when others looked away. The man who valued her skills and respected her dreams. The man who loved her not despite her strength but because of it. As the party continued around them, as fiddle music played and children laughed and family told stories, Lucas turned to Tessa and said, "You know, I will need to get those horses shod again next month." It was their private joke, the thing he said whenever he wanted to remind her of how they began. Tessa smiled, the same smile she had given him that first night in the forge, when he had surprised her by treating her like the skilled craftswoman she was. "I will be ready," she said. "I am always ready for you. And I will always come back," Lucas promised. "Every month, every day, every moment, I will always come back to you." They kissed, sealing the promise they had made to each other 25 years ago and every day since. A promise to show up, to stay, to love through every challenge and celebrate every joy. A promise that had transformed two lonely people into a family, an empty forge into a thriving business, rejection into belonging. Around them, the party went on long into the night. But Tessa and Lucas stood together in their own small circle of light. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and hard work and love. They had created not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple request from a cowboy who needed his horses shod. Tessa leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about all the years still to come. They would grow older together, watch their grandchildren have children of their own, eventually pass the ranch on to the next generation. But through it all, they would have each other. They would have this love that had saved them both, that had given their lives meaning and purpose and joy. "I love you," Tessa whispered. "I love you," Lucas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, forever." And in that moment, surrounded by family and held in the arms of the man who had changed her life, Tessa Johnson Vaughn knew that she was the luckiest woman in the world. She had been rejected by a town, saved by a cowboy, and transformed by love, and she would not have wanted it any other way. The stars shone overhead, the mountains stood eternal and strong, and in a little forge on a ranch in Colorado, the fire would burn again tomorrow, ready for another day of creation, another day of life, another day of love. The story that had begun with rejection and loneliness had become a story of hope and family and enduring love. And it was far from over. There would be more chapters to write, more challenges to face, more joys to celebrate. But Tessa and Lucas would face them together, as they always had, as they always would. Partners in work and in life, two souls who had found each other when they needed it most and built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. The cowboy had asked her to shoe his horses every month. And in doing so, he had given her everything: a home, a family, a future, and a love that would burn as bright and strong as forge fire, warming them both for all the days of their lives.